Peter Hine. I'm the president of Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York. And I would like to thank you for joining us this evening for our virtual Battles of Lexington and Concord commemoration, which includes the Fraunces Tavern Museum Book Award presentation. And at this time, I would like to welcome Ken Chase, who will give the invocation. Ken, are you with us? And can you start with the invocation?
In the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. The Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. Amen.
Thank you, Ken. I'd now like to introduce our Flag Day Chairman and Color Guard Co-Chairman, Adam Hess, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank
you, Adam. For those of you who are new to Sons of the Revolution, Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York was formed in 1883 by grandchildren of participants in the Revolutionary War. And our society was established to honor these ancestors who fought for American independence and to ensure that their bravery and their service would be remembered for generations to come. The members of the society today consists of those who can establish a relation to someone who did participate directly in the fight for American independence. Our mission is to honor these ancestors and continue to keep the memory of the Revolutionary War at the forefront of people's minds. I'd now like to take this opportunity to briefly recognize and introduce the officers and past presidents of our society who are with us this evening. Our first Vice President, Ray Manning, our Secretary, Matthew Norgard, our Treasurer, Thomas Rogers, our Registrar, David Rich, Second Vice President, Michael Conies, and then we have several past presidents with us this evening. Ambrose Richardson, who is my immediate predecessor, Jim Grayshaw, Robert McKay, Dan Coleman, and Larry Simpson, who now serves as the General President of the National General Society of the Sons of the Revolution. I'd also like to welcome several guests. Sherman Hawley, who is president of Sons of the Revolution in the state of Massachusetts. Sherman and a collection of members of the Massachusetts Society are with us this evening and will appear live from Concord, the scene of the battle, shortly. Also, Wes Oler, president of the First New York Continental Chapter, Sons of the American Revolution, and also a member of our board. Elise Richardson, regent of the New York City Chapter, National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, and Jean Hayter, regent of the Colonial or the Colonel Benjamin Talmadge Chapter, National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution. And my apologies if I've overlooked anyone. It's difficult to monitor everybody on the Zoom tonight. I'd also like to briefly thank members of our Long Room Association who are with us this evening. That is our Planned Giving Society, members who have documented an intended bequest or other planned gift, or who have made cash gifts to our endowment funds of $100,000 or more. With us tonight are past President Bob McKay, board member Ken Chase, and board member Craig Weaver. At this time, when we normally would hold an in-person Battles of Lexington and Concord dinner, we honor those who are celebrating their 40th and their 50th anniversaries as members of our society. A number of those individuals are able to join us virtually tonight. And because we were unable to hold this event last year, we are also honoring at this time those who celebrated their 40th anniversary last year. So it's a double celebration of 40th and 50th anniversaries. So as you can see on the screen, celebrating their 40th anniversary include Stephen Bacon, Pierpoint Bartow, Dan Coleman, Michael Conies, Caswell Cook, Craig Curtis, Thomas Darlington, John Dorsey, Eric Gerner, Wade Kirby, James Lenahan, Frederick Leibold, Peter Nimroff, Ernest Rota, Mark Stinson, John Stinson Sr., Peter Trundle, Anthony Wellman, and P. Bartlett Wu. And then for those celebrating their 50th anniversary, we have David Weisler, Ken Chase, who you've heard from, Robert Fletcher, Ferdinand Hopkins IV, James Kingsbury, Robert Stovall, and Dane Zabriskie. So congratulations to all of our 40th and 50th anniversary members. Now, I'd like to turn the program over to our first Vice President, Ray Manning, who will read the traditional commemorative remarks, followed by a rendition of the Concord hymn sung by Deborah Stahl.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we commemorate the 244th anniversary of the historic battles of Lexington and Concord. It is fitting that we pause to honor the band of 50 Minutemen who, on April 19th, this very day, 1775, under the Bedford and Lexington flag, stood ready to oppose the British troops on Lexington Green. It was there that Captain John Parker of the Minutemen gave his famous command, "Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they want war, it may well begin here." The British commander ordered the Minutemen to disperse. When they stood motionless, he warned them with a violent oath to disperse and then gave the order to fire. He discharged his own pistol and repeated his order. His soldiers then fired a volley which killed 8 and wounded 10 of the 50 Minutemen. The fire was returned, but Captain Parker of the Minutemen gave the order to retire, seeing that resistance was useless. The British pushed on and followed the Americans to Concord, where military stores had been collected. Along the route, the Colonials gained strength. It was there that the early form of guerrilla-type action ensued, giving the British a hard time. The British were at last halted on the bridge entering Concord. Forced to retreat and harassed by the Minutemen at every step, the British losses for that day totaled 273 against American losses of 83.
By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. The foe long since in silence slept, alike the conqueror silent sleeps, and time the ruined bridge has swept down the dark stream which seaward creeps. On this green bank by this soft stream we sat today of those heroes dare to die and leave their children free. Bid time and nature gently spare the shaft we raise to them and thee.
So many thanks to Deborah Shaw for that rendition of the Concord hymn. And now I would like to introduce the Director of Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York and its Fraunces Tavern Museum, Scott Dwyer. Scott also serves as Vice Chairman of our Color Guard, and he will give us a bit of history concerning a flag from our collection that relates to the events of tonight. Scott?
Thank you, Peter. I'm wearing my Color Guard hat this evening, but also my museum hat. On April 2nd, the museum opened our newest exhibition, To the Beat of Their Own Drums, American Regimental Flags of the Revolutionary War. We've edited down and reinterpreted the collection of flags on display to focus on American regiments and showcase how each of these different regiments and the colors and iconography that made up their flags came together to exemplify a new American identity. The flags in this exhibition come from the SRNY Color Guard, which has maintained its collection of flags for over 100 years. The flag I'm going to briefly speak to tonight, the Bedford Minutemen standard, is one of the flags in our collection. In previous years, it was brought out for this event and others on a very limited basis. However, now it's featured very prominently in this latest exhibition for all visitors to the museum to see whenever the museum is open. It's on screen right now as you see it in the museum. This flag is one of the oldest regimental flags of the war. It was carried by the Bedford Minutemen to the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775. The flag depicts a medieval knight's arm emerging from clouds, brandishing a sword, representing the indomitable arm of God. The arm is surrounded by cannonballs, and a ribbon with the phrase "Conquer or Die" in Latin stretches across the flag. We encourage all of you to visit the museum to see the rest of the flags in this exhibition. We also still have sponsorships available at various levels for the exhibition. We're very proud of our museum and our collection of flags, and this one is very special to this event. And then we have another series of flags in the exhibition which exemplify battles, cities, and regiments, all telling various stories from the Revolutionary War, which is the mission of the museum, as well as the Sons. So thank you again. If you have any questions or looking for more information, please visit us online, FrauncestavernMuseum.org/flags, and please come by and see the flag in person. We very much appreciate it. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much, Scott. I would now like to introduce the president of the Massachusetts Society of Sons of the Revolution, Shervin B. Hawley, who is joining us tonight with members of his society from Concord, Massachusetts. So Shervin, are you able to join us on the screen?
Oh, hi, can you hear us?
Excellent, good to see you.
So we're here with a number of our members and guests in Concord at the Colonial Inn, which was established or built in 1716, just down the road from the Old North Bridge. And we're very happy to be with you. We thought that you extended such a nice invitation that we would return it in style for you. So we're happy that we can gather in person, and we are all, I think everyone here and the rest of the members have always expressed great desire to come visit Fraunces Tavern at some point. And hopefully we'll be able to be invited there in a meaningful way. We'd love to come out there. I think I can speak for everyone here.
Thank you very much. And we absolutely would be delighted to see you join us at Fraunces Tavern. And who knows, maybe next year, some of you can come down and celebrate this event in person with us. But it's great to have a word from the scene up in Concord. So thank you very much, Shervin, and thank you, to everyone from the Massachusetts Society. So now I'd like to introduce the chairman of our book award committee, Ken Chase. And before turning the program over to Ken, who will present the awards to our book award winners, I should note that the views of our honorees are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York or our Fraunces Tavern Museum. But with that matter out of the way, Ken, the floor is yours. And Ken, I think you're muted, so need to unmute.
Done. Our first honoree of the Fraunces Tavern 2021 Book Award goes to Mary Beth Norton, which I'm delighted to present for her book 1784, The Long Year of Revolution. Dr. Norton is the Mary Donlan Alger Professor Emerita at American History at Cornell University and recent president of the American Historical Association. Her previous books include Liberty's Daughters, The Revolutionary Experience of American Women, and Founding Mothers and Fathers, Gendered Power in the Forming of American Society, a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Dr. Norton was previously Pitt Professor of American History and Institutions at the University of Cambridge, a fellow at Columbia University and Mellon University, and of special note to us, Shelby Cullum Davis Fellow at Princeton. Shelby Davis was a former president of the Sons. She is among the elite cadre of most respected historians of the American colonial period, having written and co-authored dozens of other books and articles. Congratulations, Professor Norton.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for this award. I think it's ironic that a book initiated by my long ago interest in the Loyalists has won an important prize offered by the Sons of the Revolution of the state of New York and the Fraunces Tavern Museum. But it's appropriate, of course, that this award's date is the anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, because the purpose of my book, 1774, is to explain the political debates and discussions that led up to those battles. The book contends that the events of the year 1774, defined as a long year consisting of 16 months that began in December 1773 and ended in April 1775, that these were critical precursors to the outbreak of fighting and the revolution as a whole. As I state in the introduction to the book, that key idea first occurred to me while I was researching and writing my doctoral dissertation on the Loyalist exiles of the Revolution. I realized then that what happened in 1774 created both Loyalists and revolutionaries. And now I know that the word Loyalist itself was first used by a man to describe himself and his friends in 1774. I didn't know that before I was researching this book. That word, in fact, made no sense before some people were perceived as disloyal, because initially, of course, all the Loyalists were loyal. They were loyal to the crown and to the empire. Previous instances of resistance to British policy in the 1760s and early 1770s, with which many studies of the revolution begin, were actually separate incidents that did not lead to significant permanent divisions in the population, as did the events of 1774. Some of the Loyalists covered in my dissertation were among the leaders of those earlier resistance activities, and some even served as delegates to the First Continental Congress. That suggested to me that something very different occurred during 1774, and I thought it would be important to investigate and identify just what had happened to cause the breach in the empire. Indeed, I expected that investigation to constitute my second book project. In the event, though, I became interested in women's and gender history in 17th and 18th century America, and it took me 40 years to return to the topic that was going to be my second book. So it's not my second book, it's my sixth. But to summarize, my sense of the importance of 1774 for the Loyalist exiles, I spent, as I recall, several hours crafting the sentence that begins my first book, The British Americans. And then when I decided to write this book, I deliberately started the first chapter of 1774 with exactly the same sentence as an epigraph. So let me quote myself. This is myself from years ago. Quote, "The year 1774 dawned 16 days after the Boston Tea Party, and by the time its 12 months ended, the royal provincial governments were in disarray. The First Continental Congress had convened and adjourned, and the battles at Lexington and Concord were just 3.5 months in the future," end quote. To me, then and now, that one sentence conveys succinctly the essence of the year I have now spent the last decade studying in detail, although I might phrase it somewhat differently were I to revise it further. In addition to recognizing that the crucial period encompasses 16 months, not just 12, I have learned that the, quote, Boston Tea Party, end quote, was not termed that until 1826. And so now I call it with contemporaries to it, the, quote, destruction of the tea. I don't use the term Boston Tea Party anymore. I might also add other events to a new list, including Parliament's adoption of the Coercive Acts and the meetings to respond to those acts that took place in the colonies during the summer of 1774. But my belief in the key significance of the events my book describes has remained unchanged for all these years. Now, why do I persist in that conclusion? I just want everyone to think about it. In 1773, Americans almost to a person were loyal to King George III and the empire. Not even people like John and Samuel Adams differed with that sense. The colonists gloried in their British identity. But by late 1774 and early 1775, as I found in my research for this book, that had changed. Over that winter, colonial governors wrote uniformly to Lord Dartmouth, the Secretary of State for America, to reveal that colonists would not obey them and that Americans regarded the Continental Congress's resolutions as their laws. Those were what were to be obeyed, the resolutions of the Continental Congress, not the decrees of the governors. Accordingly, the governors explained to their superiors in London that they thought it best not even to try to enforce obedience to British decrees because that would highlight the impotence of royal authority in America. Ordinary Americans also wrote to British friends and commercial contacts that winter, expressing the belief that there would be war in the spring. And as we know, that prediction was correct. So why haven't most earlier historians recognized the importance of 1774? Given the likely composition of my audience tonight as members of the Sons of the Revolution of New York, you are surely all familiar with the standard works on the coming of the revolution. If you think about the structure of their narratives, or you go back to your libraries and you look at the structure of their narratives, you will recognize that, with very few exceptions, among them works by the popular historian Ray Raphael, such books tend to slight the events of 1774. They jump from the tea destruction in Boston Harbor to the First Continental Congress, and then to the start of the war, without considering the many debates that occurred during those 16 crucial months. And they do that because all the authors position themselves explicitly or implicitly in the revolutionary camp. Other books that cover this period are teleological. The historians know how the story comes out, and they write from that perspective. What they focus on is explaining why and how the revolutionaries won. Unsurprisingly, therefore, they adopt the viewpoint of radical leaders and their followers and stress their actions and opinions in the ensuing narrative. In some of these books, you hardly know that there are people, well, we could call loyalists who existed in the colonies. But starting with the loyalists, by contrast, led me to understand that the 1774 events were not merely extensions of what happened previously. Future loyalists knew they were qualitatively different for a whole variety of reasons, and their writings, which I focused on those many years ago and again recently, taught me that. The few books that do look at 1774, like Raphael's, focus their attention almost exclusively on Massachusetts. But I include all the colonies in my narrative, including New York. New York is very present in my narrative, and I highlight Americans' disagreements about key issues as expressed in public writings and private unpublished correspondence. I located relevant letters in historical societies, state archives, and university manuscript collections across the country, as well as in the British Library and the National Archives of the United Kingdom. I read every political pamphlet that appeared in America between fall 1773 and April 1775, and numerous newspaper essays. I might add, some of those pamphlets were mighty turgid too. My comprehensive narrative gives voice to moderates and conservatives and to opponents of resistance, as well as to its supporters in all the colonies from Maine south to Georgia. I try not to privilege any one position, and I don't forecast how the story is going to come out. I'd like my readers to forget that they know how my narrative ends. So, what did the colonists argue about in 1774, which are topics not covered in other books? Well, they argued about whether Bostonians should have destroyed the tea. It's little known that George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and many others both thought Bostonians shouldn't have done that. They argued about whether the East India Company should be reimbursed for the loss of those 342 chests of tea, which contained more than 46 tons, now worth over $1 million. And if so, how the company should be compensated. They argued about whether to call a Congress to discuss the colony's response to the act closing the port of Boston until the tea was paid for. And that led to a compromise between moderates and radicals that created the First Continental Congress. At that Congress, the delegates spent many days debating the content of the resolutions they would issue, and they seriously considered, although they rejected, the so-called Galloway Plan of Union offered by a conservative and future loyalist, Joseph Galloway, who was, as many of you I'm sure know, a longtime ally of Benjamin Franklin in Pennsylvania politics. If it had been implemented, the Galloway Plan would have set up a form of government that resembled eventually the British Commonwealth form, with power shared between Parliament and local legislatures. And then Americans debated the methods chosen to resist Britain's further punitive measures. For one example occurred in December 1774, when Americans learned about an order in council issued by George III 2 months earlier, forbidding the export of arms and ammunition to North America. I discovered that congressional delegates from other colonies decried the spontaneous attacks on 3 New England forts in Newport, Rhode Island, New London, Connecticut, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, that quickly followed the arrival of the news of the order in council. So even though people had predicted war in the spring, such debates were continuing in March and early April of 1775. As I said, I want readers to forget that they know what happened next. So I hope that the abrupt end of the book comes as a shock when readers turn the last pages to read Lord Dartmouth's order of January 27th to General Gage to take action, and then read Gage's immediate response to the arrival of that order in Boston, a complete transcript of his April 18th orders to Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith to lead his troops to Concord to confiscate the supplies that were cached there. With those 2 orders, my book ends, except for a brief afterword about how information about the battles made its way through the colonies, except occasionally garbled and frequently disbelieved. I might add, there were people at the time who thought it was fake news. So thanks again for this award, which means a great deal to me.
Thank you. And we once gave an award to Maya Jasanoff about what happened to the exiles after the end of the war.
Now, she's a friend of mine, so it's a good book.
Thank you. The next recipient will be an honorable mention to Nina Sankovitch for her book, American Rebels, How the Hancock, Adams, and Quincy Families Fanned the Flames of Revolution. Ms. Sankovitch is the author of several previous books, most recently The Lowells of Massachusetts. A graduate of Tufts and Harvard Law School, Ms. Sankovitch has written for the New York Times and the Huffington Post and served as a judge for the Book of the Month Club. Ms. Sankovitch.
Hello, good evening. Thank you. Thank you so much to the Fraunces Tavern Museum for this wonderful honor. I am so pleased and so happy to be here tonight to be able to talk to you about my book, American Rebels. As a student of American history, I've always been interested, of course, in John and Abigail Adams and John Hancock and Dolly Quincy Hancock. But I didn't know, not until I began looking for an answer to a very specific question, that the Hancocks and Adams and Abigail Smith and Dolly, that they all knew each other as children, and relationships which they continued as they grew into adults. And I knew very little about Josiah Quincy Jr., a young man who by the end of my research became my favorite figure of the Revolution, although sadly he didn't live to see it happen. The specific question that led to my research into the Hancocks, Adams, and Quincy families was, how did the colonists make the choice of whether to remain loyal to England or not in the years leading up to the Declaration of American Independence? And yes, in the year 1774, that was a crucial year, especially for the families that I write about who were directly involved in the destruction of the tea, destruction of the baneful weed, as Abigail Adams described it. After writing my previous book, The Lowells of Massachusetts, and writing about John Lowell, who was an American patriot and lawyer who came a bit late to the cause of American independence, I found myself considering how difficult it was for a colonist raised by family, church, and state to be a loyal British citizen, to make the choice to rebel against their king and seek independence. The choice to seek independence carried with it threats to family, home, security, even one's own life. Relationships with long-term friends could be severed, family relations could sour, neighbors might turn against you, you might be arrested as a traitor, imprisoned, punished with death. So in addition to wondering how the colonists who chose to pursue independence from England, how they came to such a momentous decision, I also wondered how that choice of whether to stay loyal or to seek independence cut across class lines. And I wondered how it cut across gender lines. So I began looking for a community to study in which men and women of different classes and backgrounds work together towards independence. And I found just such a community in the village of Braintree. And I found the choice that cut across class and gender lines illustrated in the Quincy, Hancock, and Adams families. So in my book, American Rebels, I follow the young Johns, John Hancock and John Adams, Josiah Quincy, Abigail Smith, and Dolly Quincy through their youth and into adulthood. I present their stories and their relationships with each other and with their community and within their families to demonstrate how these colonists had the courage to challenge England and to illustrate the huge obstacles they faced in making that choice for independence or in not making that choice, because I also write about Sam Quincy, who was the brother to Josiah Quincy, and who resisted the path to independence because he was frightened of the terrible war that would result. And of course, he was right. And what I have found so interesting in the past year since my book came out, it came out last March, is that so much of what I write about in American Rebels has proven to be relevant to this last year that we have lived through, just the horrible times of 2020 and into 2021. I mean, protests on the street, mistrust in the justice system, the toll taken by terrible epidemics. Was that last year, or am I talking about 1774, 1775, 1776? There are so many parallels. I mean, the colonists I write about received conflicting news reports They remained isolated from friends and family, with letters taking weeks and even months to arrive. They suffered deprivations in the present and uncertainties as to what their future might hold. But they persisted, they persevered for the good of their communities, for the common good. What drove them on was a deeply held ideal that communal rights mattered. The right for everyone to be safe in their home, on the streets of their community, the right to be heard in the halls of justice and of government. A reader of my book has described how I take big figures from history and bring them back down to human size. And that's because the American rebels I write about were human, obviously. They were human with weaknesses as well as strengths. They had their petty moments. They had their passionate moments. They had very complex relationships with each other. But there's no doubt that bravery was one of their shared strengths, and they were willing to sacrifice their own safety and security to promote safety and security for others. I just want to share with you all a quote from Josiah Quincy Jr., something he said to his fellow patriots to encourage them through hardships. He said, he wrote in a letter, "May you have the fortitude to suffer, courage to encounter, and activity and perseverance to press forward." And I wish for all of us tonight, and I wish for all of us in the months to come, fortitude, courage, activity, and perseverance. And thank you again to the Fraunces Tavern Museum for this great honor. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your words, which express so beautifully the intricacies of Massachusetts society and how they all related. And some of them became loyalists, but most of them became patriots. The third award and final award, honorable mention, is presented to Andrew Waters for his book, To the End of the World, Nathanael, Greene, Charles Cornwallis, and the Race to the Dam. He has also written The Quaker and the Gamecock, Nathanael Greene, Thomas Sumter, and the War for the South, and edited Battle of Cowpens, Contemporary and Primary Accounts. Mr. Waters received BA and MBA degrees from the University of North Carolina and is pursuing a PhD at Clemson University. Mr. Waters.
Thank you, Ken. I hope you can hear me.
I can.
Okay, great. Greetings from sunny and pretty warm Spartanburg, South Carolina. It's nice to be here with you all tonight. I'm going to keep my remarks a little less formal than our previous speakers, but first of all, I would like to thank the New York Sons of the Revolution, certainly the Fraunces Tavern Museum, and their award committee for selecting me for this honorable mention. In a lifetime of writing, teaching myself to write and wanting to be a writer, this is the highest acclaim my writing has ever achieved. I'm proud of this distinction and grateful to the Fraunces Tavern Museum for recognizing me and people like me in our efforts to write about the American Revolution and this period of history. And really, my only regret is that I could not use this event as an excuse to come to New York City because I lived in New York for 2 years as a young man, and it has a very special place in my heart. I would like to thank my family, especially my wife and son, Ann and Eli Waters. They are both truly my biggest fans and my biggest supporters. And without them, I would not be able to devote the hours and effort that it takes to write a book like To the End of the World. I'd really like to thank tonight my publisher, Bruce Franklin, with West Home Publishing. Bruce is the consummate small press book publisher with flawless aesthetic and taste. From the first moment I ever saw a West Home Publishing book, I knew I wanted to see my name on one of their covers. And when I finally made it, the result was even more beautiful than I could have ever hoped. Thank you so much, Bruce. I don't think he's here tonight, but surely some of you are aware of the good work that West Home Publishing is doing. I'd also like to thank both Bruce and his colleague, Don Hagest at the Journal of the American Revolution for their support in my history writing. And when I first became interested in the American Revolution as a writing subject, discovering the Journal of the American Revolution online was what encouraged me to try my hand at historical writing. I had never really done any writing like this until I got into my late 40s, and kind of finding an audience there, and the welcome that I received from Don and Bruce and everyone who's been involved at the Journal of the American Revolution really encouraged me and gave me the confidence to be a historical writing. And the articles there that I did, and as they seem to be well received, that gave me the confidence to begin writing history books. So I think all of us who care and read about the American Revolution, writers, aspiring writers, and readers are lucky to have such a great online forum as an outlet for our passion. Thank you, Don. I'd also like to just thank my friend Paul Wood from Spartanburg, South Carolina, who's joining us tonight and has been a great supporter of me and my writing. Thank you for coming out tonight, Paul. I appreciate it. I've been interested in the in history for all of my life, but my passion for the American Revolution ignited after moving to South Carolina in 2013 and beginning to learn about the rich American Revolution heritage of this state and this region. At first, I started writing about the American Revolution to attempt to understand my own relationship to this beautiful, frustrating, and complex culture. My interest in Nathanael Greene stemmed from this relationship. Like Greene, I found myself trying to learn the unique culture of South Carolina as an outsider. Now, To the End of the World was written as an attempt to understand those influences in the context of North Carolina, which is my native state. And believe it or not, there is quite a significant cultural difference between the two Carolinas, and just crossing the border from one to another is a bit of a culture shock. In part, this book, The Race to the End of the World, about the race to the Dan, was written to explore the role North Carolina played in the conflict and help explain that role to the American readers. But really, this book was written for the 15-year-old me, that geeky kid who would stay up late at night reading Bruce Catton, Burke Davis, Stephen Ambrose, and dozens like them. I wanted to write a book that made history compelling, even exciting, and I believe The Race to the Dan was a campaign history that could be told in that fashion if I put my heart and soul into its telling. For me, this award is a recognition that, to some degree, I succeeded, and I could not be more humbled or honored. Thank you for this honorable mention, and thank you for including me in tonight's presentation.
Thank you. And one of the reasons why I was so interested is that I'm a member of the Society of the Cincinnati in the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. And our group has supported the publication of the Nathanael Greene papers,
Okay.
to which I contributed. And I also, with Ambrose Richardson, was at Valley Forge when they presented a statue of Nathanael Greene outside the church there. So, and I met one of the fellows who had worked on the Nathanael Greene papers. He's a very interesting fellow because he was a Quaker originally, but he stood up and fought for the revolution, and he was one of actually the most inspired American generals.
My son calls me a Nathanael Greene fanboy. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's accurate.
Keep going, Greene. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ken, and my thanks to our authors who we've honored tonight. Appreciate all three of you joining us. Before we go, I want to just highlight several upcoming events. This Thursday, April 22, Fraunces Tavern Museum will host author Jack Kelly as part of the Fraunces Tavern Museum virtual evening lecture series. Jack Kelly will speak about his book, Valcour, the 1776 campaign that saved the cause of liberty. Then this Saturday, April 24th, there will be an in-person, this means in person, not on Zoom, walking tour where you can learn about the New York City Tea Party of 1774. We still have some tickets available. You can find out more about this event and other upcoming events by going to the Fraunces Tavern Museum website. Just type in Fraunces Tavern Museum into your browser and you'll locate the website. Looking a little bit further into the future, we will have our upcoming annual George Washington Birthday Ball in February of 2022. This year's ball was a virtual event. We look forward to being back again in person on Friday, February 25, 2022 at the Metropolitan Club in New York City. And then finally, on Friday, June 11th, so 2 months from now, Sons of the Revolution will be hosting our annual Flag Day commemoration. And I'd like to call on Flag Day Chairman Adam Hess to tell you briefly what we are currently planning for that event. Adam? So it may be Adam's having difficulty unmuting. Let me just briefly tell you that planning is still ongoing. There's an issue of what the extent of the event that the city will permit, but we definitely plan to have some event recognizing Flag Day. Every year our society, up until the pandemic, every year for many years our society has hosted a parade that starts at City Hall and comes down Broadway in Lower Manhattan to Fraunces Tavern. And we have literally hundreds of school children, dozens of other groups participating. We weren't able to do that last year. This year will be a reduced event, but we do intend to do something to recognize a Flag Day as we have for many years in the past. Adam, were you able to unmute and join us? So, not hearing Adam, I think before we adjourn, I'd like to call on Ken Chase to give the benediction.
This is based on the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I might not seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
So thank you, Ken, and thank you all for coming to our Battles of Lexington and Concord commemoration, including the Fraunces Tavern Museum Book Award presentation. We hope to have an in-person event next year. Hope to see all of you then in person. A recording of this event will be available, and details will be sent to those who participated. So thank you again, and have a good evening.